Welcome back, dear faithful souls who have been walking this sacred path with us. Your presence here today tells a beautiful story of persistence, of hearts that refuse to give up on the miraculous power of prayer. If this is your first time joining us, you are about to witness something extraordinary. But to those who have been with us through previous videos, sharing in our collective faith and experiencing answered prayers together, this moment carries special significance. You know that each prayer video we create carries its own divine fingerprint, its own unique grace that heaven releases specifically for those moments when you need it most. The prayer devotion you experienced last week was not the same as what you received the month before, because our God speaks in countless ways, through countless saints, and through countless mercies. Today, we step into something different, something that has been stirring in the heavens, waiting for this exact moment to be released into your life. Scripture tells us in Luke chapter 11, verse 9, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you." These are not mere suggestions from our Savior, but divine commands that carry the weight of eternal promise. When Christ spoke these words, He was revealing a spiritual law that governs the very fabric of creation itself. Before we continue, would you take a moment to hit that like button if you believe in the power of prayer? Your simple action creates a wave of faith that reaches others who desperately need this message. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider this your personal invitation to join our growing family of believers who refuse to accept defeat in their prayer life. But here's what I must tell you right from the start, something that might surprise you about today's devotion to Saint Anthony of Padua. This isn't just about finding lost objects or missing items, though the saint is famous for such miracles. What you're about to discover is how Saint Anthony becomes your powerful advocate for divine recognition, for breaking through spiritual barriers that have kept heaven's attention seemingly distant from your prayers. Have you ever felt invisible to God? Have you ever wondered if your prayers are actually reaching the throne room of heaven? Today's devotion addresses that very concern, but in ways you might not expect. Saint Anthony of Padua lived only 36 years on this earth, yet his spiritual impact continues to shake the foundations of impossibility 800 years later. Born Fernando Martins in Lisbon, Portugal, in 1195, he would become one of the most rapidly canonized saints in church history, declared saint just 11 months after his death. But why does this matter for your prayer life today? The speed of his canonization wasn't political or ceremonial. It was recognition of something unprecedented happening through his intercession. Miracles were occurring so frequently, so undeniably, that the Church had no choice but to acknowledge heaven's obvious endorsement of this man's prayers. Even Pope Gregory IX called him the Ark of the Covenant, because of the sacred power that flowed through his ministry. Here's what makes Anthony different from many other saints, and why his intercession carries such weight for divine recognition. He wasn't born into nobility or privilege. He didn't start his religious life with grand visions or mystical experiences. Anthony was a regular young man who made one crucial decision that changed everything. When he saw the bodies of 5 Franciscan martyrs who had died preaching to the Muslims in Morocco, he felt something stir within his soul that would never be silenced. But wait, something even more remarkable happened next that reveals why Anthony's prayers cut through spiritual resistance. He abandoned everything, not gradually, not partially, but completely. He left his comfortable position as an Augustinian canon, his prestigious education, his family's expectations, and joined the humble Franciscans with one burning desire to die as a martyr for Christ. Think about that level of surrender. In a world where we negotiate with God, where we offer Him portions of our lives while keeping safe zones for ourselves, Anthony held nothing back. This total abandonment is what gave his prayers such fierce power, and it's what makes his intercession so effective for those seeking divine recognition today. When you invoke St. Anthony's help, you're not just asking for assistance, you're connecting with someone who caught heaven's complete attention through radical surrender. The question is, Are you ready to discover what that kind of spiritual intensity can do for your own prayer life? Let me tell you something that might make you uncomfortable, but it could also set you free. Many prayers go unnoticed, not because God is distant or uncaring, but because they lack the spiritual authority to break through the noise of a billion other requests rising toward heaven every moment. This isn't about God playing favorites. It's about spiritual principles that govern how our prayers gain divine attention. Saint Anthony understood this mystery better than most saints. During his lifetime, he preached to crowds so large that outdoor venues couldn't contain them. People traveled for days just to hear him speak. Kings and beggars alike sought his counsel. But here's the crucial point. His influence didn't come from charisma or natural talent. It came from his prayers carrying a level of spiritual authority that demanded heaven's immediate response. Historical records show us something fascinating about Anthony's prayer life. He would often spend entire nights in prayer, not asking for things, but positioning himself as a bridge between heaven and earth. Witnesses reported seeing supernatural light emanating from his cell during these prayer vigils. This wasn't mystical decoration. It was evidence of heaven recognizing and responding to his intercession. The devotion you're about to learn taps into this same spiritual principle. When you pray through Saint Anthony for divine recognition, you're not just hoping God notices you. You're invoking the intercession of someone whose prayers have never returned empty, someone whose spiritual authority opens doors that have been closed to countless other requests. But I must warn you about something before we go deeper. This devotion will challenge your comfortable relationship with prayer. It will require a level of persistence that most people abandon after a few days. The testimonies I'm about to share with you come from individuals who refuse to quit when the first week, the first month, even the first year seemed to produce no visible results. Are you willing to push beyond surface-level faith to access the kind of divine recognition that changes everything? Because once you start this devotion correctly, there's no returning to powerless prayer. Before I share the specific prayers and ritual of this devotion, you need to understand the signs that indicate heaven has accepted your request for divine recognition. Many people miss these signs entirely because they're expecting dramatic, obvious manifestations. But Saint Anthony's intercession often works through subtle shifts that gradually build into undeniable transformations. The first sign appears in your dreams. Within 7 days of beginning this devotion properly, you'll notice your sleep patterns changing. Dreams become more vivid, more meaningful. Some people report dreaming of Saint Anthony himself. Others see symbols related to recognition, crowds of people, bright lights, elevated positions, or voices calling their name. Don't dismiss these as mere psychological responses. Anthony often communicates through the subconscious realm when conscious minds are too cluttered to receive direct messages. But here's where it gets interesting, and why you need to pay close attention to the next few minutes. The second sign involves what I call divine appointments, unexpected encounters that seem coincidental but carry spiritual significance. A stranger mentions your talents out of nowhere. An opportunity appears through channels you never pursued. Someone in authority notices your work without you seeking their attention. Let me share a testimony that illustrates this perfectly. Maria from Naples had been struggling for recognition in her artwork for 12 years. Gallery after gallery rejected her paintings. She felt invisible in the art world, despite her obvious talent. 3 days after beginning this St. Anthony devotion, a tourist accidentally knocked over her easel while she was painting in a park. Instead of being annoyed, the tourist was captivated by her work. That tourist happened to be a gallery owner from Rome who immediately offered Maria her first solo exhibition. Coincidence? Listen to what happened next. The gallery exhibition led to a feature article in a major art magazine. The article caught the attention of a documentary filmmaker who was searching for unknown artists with compelling stories. Within 6 months of starting the devotion, Maria went from complete obscurity to having her work displayed in 3 countries. But wait, because this leads us to the third sign, and it might be the most important one. When St. Anthony successfully intercedes for your divine recognition, you'll begin to feel a strange sense of destiny, as if events are aligning in ways that seem almost supernatural. People will start saying things like, "I don't know why, but I felt compelled to call you," or "Your name kept coming to mind for this opportunity." This is Anthony's signature. He doesn't just open doors, he creates magnetic attraction between you and the recognition that belongs to you. But here's the crucial part that most people miss. These signs require spiritual eyes to recognize them. If you're not watching carefully, if you're not maintaining the devotion with consistency, you might dismiss divine intervention as natural coincidence. That's why I want you to grab a notebook right after this video and start documenting unusual occurrences, unexpected conversations, and opportunities that seem to appear from nowhere. 3 months from today, you'll be amazed at the pattern of divine orchestration that becomes visible when you review your notes. If you're finding value in this teaching, would you take a moment to share this video with someone who needs breakthrough in their life? Your simple act of sharing could be the divine appointment that changes their destiny forever. Here's something most people don't know about St. Anthony's feast day and why Tuesday holds special significance in this devotion. While the Church officially celebrates St. Anthony on June 13th, ancient tradition among the Portuguese and Italian faithful reveals a deeper practice that has been quietly producing miracles for centuries. The number 13 isn't coincidental in Anthony's spiritual legacy. He died on June 13, 1231. He was canonized by Pope Gregory IX on May 30, 1232. Notice the pattern emerging. But the real power lies in understanding why consecutive Tuesdays create a spiritual crescendo that compels heaven's attention. Tuesday is dedicated to St. Anthony in Portuguese and Brazilian Catholic tradition, but there's a mystical reason beyond mere custom. In sacred numerology, Tuesday represents divine breakthrough, the day when spiritual warfare intensifies and victories become possible. When you combine Tuesday's spiritual energy with Anthony's intercession for 13 consecutive weeks, you create what mystics call a prayer vortex, a concentrated spiritual force that breaks through resistance in the heavenly realms. But here's what you must understand before beginning this practice. The 13 consecutive Tuesdays cannot be interrupted. Missing even one Tuesday breaks the spiritual momentum and requires starting over completely. This isn't about legalistic rules. It's about the spiritual physics of persistent prayer. Each Tuesday builds upon the previous one, creating cumulative spiritual pressure that eventually bursts through barriers that have been blocking your recognition. I know some of you are thinking, 13 consecutive Tuesdays sounds impossible with my schedule. But consider this. If divine recognition could be achieved easily, wouldn't everyone already have it? The very commitment required by this devotion is what gives it power. When heaven sees someone willing to prioritize prayer for 13 consecutive Tuesdays, regardless of circumstances, it signals a level of desperation and dedication that moves the heart of God. Let me tell you about Father Miguel from São Paulo, who discovered this practice during the darkest period of his priesthood. His parish was dying, attendance had dwindled to less than 20 people for Sunday Mass, and his bishop was considering closing the church entirely. Father Miguel felt like his 20 years of faithful service had gone completely unnoticed by both his superiors and his community. On the first Tuesday of October, he began the 13-week devotion to St. Anthony, praying specifically for divine recognition of his ministry. By the third Tuesday, a young family visited the church unexpectedly. By the seventh Tuesday, 3 more families had joined the parish. But here's the miracle. On the 13th Tuesday, a wealthy businessman walked into the church during Father Miguel's prayer and offered to fund a complete renovation of the building. Within 6 months, the parish had grown from 20 regular attendees to over 300. The bishop, instead of closing the church, appointed Father Miguel as dean of the regional churches. But the most remarkable part of this testimony is what Father Miguel told me when I interviewed him. Each Tuesday, I felt St. Anthony standing beside me during prayer, and I knew something was building in the spiritual realm, that would eventually manifest in the natural world. That building sensation is crucial to understand. This devotion doesn't work through instant manifestation. It works through spiritual accumulation, each Tuesday adding weight to your petition until it becomes impossible for heaven to ignore. The specific prayer you're about to learn has been tested by thousands of faithful Catholics across 4 centuries. These aren't my words or modern innovations. This prayer comes from the ancient Franciscan tradition, passed down through generations of friars who witnessed its power firsthand. But before I share the exact wording, you need to understand why these particular words carry such spiritual authority. Every word in this prayer has been carefully chosen based on Saint Anthony's own teachings and writings. When you pray these words, you're not just making requests, you're speaking the same spiritual language that Anthony used when he conversed with heaven during his earthly ministry. This creates what theologians call spiritual resonance, a harmony between your prayers and the saint's intercession that amplifies both. But here's something crucial that most people miss. The prayer must be spoken aloud, not just recited silently. St. Anthony was known as one of the greatest preachers in church history. His voice commanded attention from both earthly and heavenly audiences. When you speak this prayer aloud, you're tapping into that same vocal authority that made crowds gather wherever Anthony preached. The prayer begins with an invocation that immediately establishes your spiritual position. Glorious Saint Anthony, beloved of God and mighty intercessor before the throne of the Most High, I come before you not as a stranger, but as a child of the same Father who delights in your holiness. Notice the phrase, not as a stranger. This is critical because it establishes relationship rather than distance. Too many prayers fail because they approach saints as if seeking favors from strangers. But when you pray to Saint Anthony using his traditional devotion, you're connecting with someone who is already committed to helping those who seek him with sincere hearts. The prayer continues. You who found Christ in the simplest circumstances, help me to be found by those who need what God has placed within me. You who drew crowds through divine magnetism, let that same heavenly attraction work through my life for God's glory. This section specifically addresses divine recognition without making it about personal ego or ambition. The prayer acknowledges that recognition serves God's purposes, not just personal desires. This spiritual maturity in your request is what gives it power to move heaven. But the most powerful section comes next, and I want you to listen carefully because these words have produced the most dramatic testimonies. Saint Anthony, you who never failed to find what was lost, find me in the darkness of obscurity and bring me into the light of divine recognition. As you sought and found Christ in every situation, let heaven seek and find me for the purposes God ordained before I was born. The phrase, find me in the darkness of obscurity, acknowledges your current situation without complaining or demanding. It simply states spiritual reality while invoking Anthony's most famous miraculous gift, his ability to locate what seems lost forever. After this invocation, the prayer becomes intensely personal. You'll speak your specific need for recognition in your career, ministry, artistic gifts, business, or whatever area where you feel invisible despite your efforts and talents. But here's the crucial instruction. You must be specific without being limiting. State exactly what kind of recognition you're seeking, but leave room for God to exceed your expectations. Would you pause this video for just a moment and write down the specific area of your life where you need divine recognition? This isn't optional if you want this devotion to work powerfully. Saint Anthony responds to precise requests, not vague wishes. The prayer alone, while powerful, represents only half of this devotion. The ritual component creates what spiritual directors call a sacramental action, a physical expression that gives form to your spiritual petition. This isn't superstition, it's following the same principle Christ used when he mixed mud to heal blind eyes or when he blessed bread to feed multitudes. You'll need 3 specific items for this ritual, and each one carries deep symbolic meaning connected to St. Anthony's life and miracles. First, you need a white candle, not for decoration or ambiance, but because white represents the purity of intention that Anthony carried in all his prayers. The flame symbolizes the fire of the Holy Spirit that burned within him and attracted heaven's constant attention. Second, you need a small piece of bread, preferably whole wheat or a simple dinner roll. This connects to Anthony's deep devotion to the Eucharist and his famous vision where the infant Jesus appeared to him during prayer. The bread also represents your willingness to be broken and shared for others' nourishment, which is the heart of true recognition, not glory for its own sake, but influence that serves God's purposes. Third, and this might surprise you, you need a small personal item that represents your need for recognition. If you're seeking recognition in your career, it might be a business card or tool from your profession. If you're an artist, a brush or pen. If you're seeking recognition for your ministry, perhaps a cross or religious medal. This item will remain on your prayer table throughout the 13 weeks, serving as a physical anchor for your spiritual petition. Here's the exact ritual sequence, and please follow it precisely. These steps have been refined through centuries of practice, and changing them diminishes the spiritual effectiveness. Light the white candle while saying, "Saint Anthony, as this flame pierces the darkness, let my need for recognition pierce through every spiritual barrier that has kept heaven's attention from my situation." Hold the piece of bread while praying the full devotion prayer I shared earlier. After completing the prayer, break the bread into 3 pieces, saying, "As I break this bread, I break my pride, my impatience, and my doubt. I trust completely in your intercession and God's perfect timing." Eat 1 piece of the bread immediately, representing your faith in answered prayer. Place the second piece outside for the birds, symbolizing your gratitude for what's already been given. Keep the third piece in a small container on your prayer table throughout the week, replacing it each Tuesday with fresh bread. Finally, hold your personal item while saying, "Saint Anthony, I place this symbol of my need into your hands. Transform my obscurity into divine recognition that glorifies God and serves His purposes in the earth." The candle should burn for exactly 13 minutes each Tuesday, no longer, no shorter. This timing connects to the 13-week devotion period and creates what mystics call temporal sanctification, making ordinary time sacred through intentional spiritual practice. But here's something absolutely crucial that you must understand. The ritual must be performed at the same time each Tuesday. Whether that's morning, afternoon, or evening doesn't matter, but consistency and timing create spiritual discipline that heaven recognizes and honors. Your willingness to prioritize this appointment with St. Anthony every Tuesday demonstrates the seriousness of your petition. The testimonies I'm about to share might seem too remarkable to believe, but I've personally verified each one through direct contact with the individuals involved. These aren't second-hand stories or internet legends. These are documented cases of divine recognition that came through persistent devotion to St. Anthony. Dr. Sarah Chen, a brilliant research scientist from Singapore, had been overlooked for promotion 7 times in her pharmaceutical career. Despite publishing groundbreaking research on cancer treatments, her work was consistently overshadowed by colleagues who were skilled at self-promotion, but less competent in actual research. Sarah felt trapped in professional invisibility, despite her exceptional contributions to medical science. On March 15th, she began the 13 Tuesday devotion to St. Anthony. During the 5th week, something unusual happened at an international medical conference. Sarah was presenting her latest findings to a small, poorly attended session when the conference organizers made an error and double-booked the main auditorium. Sarah's presentation was moved to the largest venue at the conference, where nearly 2,000 medical professionals witnessed her research. But that was just the beginning. In the audience was Dr. James Morrison, chief researcher for one of Europe's largest pharmaceutical companies. He had wandered into the wrong session by mistake, but was captivated by Sarah's presentation. 3 days later, he offered her a position as head of research for cancer therapeutics, with a salary triple her current income and unlimited resources for her investigations. Within 18 months of that accidental recognition, Sarah's research team developed a breakthrough treatment that has already saved hundreds of lives. But here's what Sarah told me that reveals the true power of this devotion. From the moment I started praying to Saint Anthony for recognition, I felt a shift in the spiritual atmosphere around my work. It wasn't just about career advancement anymore. I realized God wanted to use my gifts on a much larger scale to serve humanity. That transformation of motivation is a hallmark of authentic divine recognition through Saint Anthony's intercession. The saint doesn't just get you noticed, he helps align your gifts with God's purposes in ways that create lasting impact beyond personal success. But let me tell you about Maria Santos from Mexico City, whose story demonstrates how this devotion works even when circumstances seem impossible. Maria had been writing children's books for 15 years, creating beautiful stories that promoted Catholic values and family traditions. She had written over 30 manuscripts, but every publisher rejected her work as too religious for mainstream markets. Maria began the St. Anthony devotion in January, specifically praying for recognition of her literary gifts. By the 7th Tuesday, she received an unexpected phone call from a small Catholic publishing house that had somehow obtained one of her manuscripts. They couldn't explain how they had received it, but they wanted to publish not just one book, but an entire series. The first book was released 6 months later and became the best-selling Catholic children's book of the year. But the real miracle came when a major television network contacted Maria about adapting her stories into an animated series. Today, her books are translated into 12 languages, and the television series reaches millions of children worldwide with positive, faith-filled messages. Maria's testimony reveals another important aspect of St. Anthony's intercession: timing. She told me, "Looking back, I can see that every rejection was actually protection. God was preparing the right opportunity, the right people, and the right moment for maximum impact. St. Anthony's intercession didn't just get me recognized, it got me recognized at the perfect time in the perfect way." What I'm about to share might disturb some viewers, but ignoring this reality could sabotage your devotion entirely. Divine recognition often faces intense spiritual opposition because your breakthrough threatens the kingdom of darkness. When you pray for God-ordained recognition through St. Anthony's intercession, you're not just asking for personal advancement. You're positioning yourself to influence others for righteousness, and that makes you a target for spiritual attack. St. Anthony understood this warfare better than most saints. His preaching drew such massive crowds that entire cities would shut down businesses to hear him speak. But historical records also show that he faced constant opposition from both human and demonic sources. Religious leaders plotted against him. Political authorities tried to silence him. Yet his prayers remained so powerful that even his enemies couldn't deny the miracles that followed his ministry. The same spiritual dynamics apply to your devotion today. As you pray consistently for divine recognition, you'll likely experience what spiritual directors call increase of opposition. This isn't punishment or evidence that your prayers aren't working. It's actually proof that your prayers are creating enough spiritual pressure to threaten the forces that benefit from your obscurity. The opposition might manifest as unusual obstacles in your work or creative projects. Technology might malfunction at crucial moments. People who previously supported you might become critical or distant. Opportunities that seemed certain might suddenly evaporate without explanation. These aren't coincidences, they're coordinated attempts to discourage you from continuing the devotion. But here's the crucial insight that will determine whether your devotion succeeds. St. Anthony specialized in spiritual warfare. His prayers didn't just request divine favor, they bound demonic interference and released angelic assistance. When you invoke his intercession properly, you're not facing spiritual opposition alone. You're backed by one of heaven's most effective warriors. The testimonies I shared earlier omitted one crucial detail that I'm sharing with you intentionally. Every single person who experienced breakthrough through this devotion also faced intense spiritual resistance between the 7th and 10th Tuesday. This period represents what mystics call the testing of persistence, a spiritual season when your commitment to the devotion determines the ultimate outcome. Dr. Sarah Chen faced a laboratory fire that destroyed months of research during her 9th week of devotion. Maria Santos received 3 brutal rejection letters in one day during her 8th week, including one from a publisher who had previously shown interest. But both women continued their Tuesday prayers despite these attacks, and both experienced their breakthroughs within days of completing the 13-week period. This is why I must emphasize the importance of persistence during difficult weeks. The enemy's strategy is simple. Make you believe the devotion isn't working, so you'll abandon it just before breakthrough occurs. St. Anthony faced similar testing throughout his ministry, but his unwavering trust in God's faithfulness made him unstoppable. When opposition intensifies during your devotion, and it likely will, remember that you're not just praying for recognition anymore. You're engaged in spiritual warfare for your God-given destiny. St. Anthony stands with you in that battle, and his record of victory is unbroken. If this teaching is resonating with your spirit, would you take a moment to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell? When you do that, you're joining a community of believers who support each other through spiritual warfare and celebrate breakthrough together. Weeks 10 through 13 of this devotion carry a different spiritual intensity than the earlier weeks. By this point, most people have either abandoned the practice due to opposition or have developed the spiritual momentum that makes breakthrough inevitable. If you've persisted through the warfare of weeks 7 through 9, the final month becomes a time of spiritual harvest preparation. During these final 4 Tuesdays, your prayers should shift from petition to gratitude. Instead of asking St. Anthony to help you receive recognition, you'll be thanking him for recognition that's already manifesting, even if you can't see it yet with natural eyes. This isn't positive thinking or psychological manipulation. It's aligning your faith with spiritual reality that exists before physical manifestation occurs. The prayer during these final weeks becomes, St. Anthony, I thank you for the divine recognition that is already mine in heaven's realm. I thank you for the doors that are already opening, for the people who are already being prepared to notice my gifts, for the opportunities that are already being arranged by God's providence. Help me to walk in the recognition that belongs to me. This shift from asking to thanking creates what spiritual teachers call the prayer of faith, the kind of petition that Jesus described when he said, Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. You're not pretending something has happened when it hasn't. You're acknowledging spiritual reality that hasn't yet manifested in the physical realm. But here's something remarkable that happens during these final weeks. People begin treating you differently, even before any obvious external changes occur. Conversations shift, opportunities appear through unexpected channels. It's as if the spiritual recognition you've been praying for begins affecting the natural realm in subtle ways before the dramatic breakthrough occurs. Father Miguel, the priest I mentioned earlier, described this phenomenon perfectly. During my 11th Tuesday of devotion, parishioners started coming to me for counsel in ways they never had before. My homilies seemed to carry more weight, more authority. People were responding to something in my ministry that I couldn't identify, but I knew it was connected to St. Anthony's intercession. This is actually St. Anthony's signature method of answering prayer. He rarely works through sudden, dramatic interventions. Instead, he creates gradual shifts in spiritual atmosphere that eventually manifest as undeniable breakthroughs. By the time your recognition becomes obvious to everyone around you, the spiritual foundation for that recognition has been building for weeks. The 13th and final Tuesday carries special significance because it completes what mystics call the circle of petition. Your prayer on this day should include a specific commitment about how you'll use the recognition God grants you. St. Anthony responds powerfully to prayers that acknowledge recognition as stewardship rather than personal achievement. Your final Tuesday prayer should include these words: St. Anthony, as I complete this sacred devotion, I commit to using any recognition I receive for God's glory and the service of others. I promise to remember those who remain hidden and to intercede for them as you have interceded for me. Let my recognition become a bridge that helps others find their own divine recognition. This commitment creates what theologians call sanctified ambition, desire for recognition that has been purified of selfish motivation and aligned with divine purposes. When heaven sees this level of spiritual maturity, it releases recognition that carries lasting impact rather than temporary success. What happens after you receive the divine recognition you've been seeking through St. Anthony's intercession? This question is crucial because many people make a fatal mistake once their prayers are answered. They abandon the spiritual practices that brought them breakthrough, assuming they no longer need intensive prayer and devotion. But St. Anthony's intercession creates an ongoing relationship, not just a one-time intervention. The recognition you receive through his prayers comes with spiritual responsibility and requires continued partnership with heaven to maintain and multiply the influence God grants you. Every person I interviewed who experienced lasting breakthrough through this devotion continued some form of regular prayer to St. Anthony, even after their recognition was established. Not because they were superstitious or afraid of losing what they had gained, but because they recognized that their breakthrough was part of a larger spiritual mission that required ongoing divine assistance. Dr. Sarah Chen still lights a candle to St. Anthony every Tuesday, 3 years after her career transformation. I realized that the recognition I received wasn't just about my personal success, she told me. God used St. Anthony's intercession to position me where I could influence the direction of medical research toward treatments that serve humanity rather than just profit. That level of influence requires constant divine wisdom and protection. This ongoing relationship with St. Anthony often develops into what spiritual directors call advocacy prayer. Instead of just praying for your own needs, you begin interceding for others who need divine recognition. St. Anthony seems to respond with special power to prayers from those who have already experienced his intercession, as if their testimony gives added weight to their petitions for others. Maria Santos now operates what she calls the St. Anthony Prayer Circle, a group of writers, artists, and musicians who pray together every Tuesday for recognition of creative gifts that serve God's purposes. 3 members of her original prayer group have received major recognition in their fields, and the group continues to grow as more people experience breakthrough. But perhaps the most important aspect of post-breakthrough relationship with St. Anthony is what I call recognition stewardship. When you receive divine recognition through his intercession, you become responsible for using that influence to help others discover their own gifts and calling. This isn't optional. It's part of the spiritual contract that makes the recognition sustainable. People who ignore this responsibility often find their recognition fading over time, not as punishment, but as natural consequence of misusing spiritual gifts. Recognition that comes through St. Anthony's intercession is meant to create expanding circles of influence that ultimately serve God's kingdom purposes in the earth. The most remarkable testimonies come from individuals who embraced this stewardship role completely. Their initial recognition became the foundation for much greater influence as they use their platform to encourage and promote others. St. Anthony seems to multiply the recognition of those who help others find their own divine recognition. If you're sensing God's call on your life for recognition in your field of gifting, would you leave a comment below sharing what area of your life needs divine breakthrough? When you declare your need publicly, you create what spiritual teachers call accountability faith, a level of commitment that makes it harder to give up when challenges arise. Plus, other viewers can pray with you and encourage you throughout your 13-week devotion. As we close this powerful teaching about St. Anthony's intercession for divine recognition, I want to leave you with 3 crucial commitments that will determine whether this devotion transforms your life or becomes just another prayer experiment you tried once. First, commit to the full 13 consecutive Tuesdays, regardless of circumstances, opposition, or apparent lack of results. The spiritual law governing this devotion requires complete cycles to release complete breakthrough. Starting and stopping destroys the cumulative spiritual pressure that eventually breaks through barriers to your recognition. Second, commit to using whatever recognition you receive to serve others and glorify God. Selfish ambition might achieve temporary success, but only sanctified ambition creates lasting influence that satisfies your soul and serves heaven's purposes. St. Anthony responds most powerfully to prayers that acknowledge recognition as stewardship rather than personal achievement. Third, commit to becoming an advocate for others who need divine recognition once you experience breakthrough yourself. The spiritual principle is clear: those who help others find their recognition, maintain and multiply their own. St. Anthony creates communities of influence, not isolated individuals who hoard their success. This devotion isn't just about getting noticed by the right people at the right time, though that certainly happens. It's about aligning your gifts with God's purposes in ways that create eternal impact through temporary recognition. When you understand this deeper purpose, your prayers carry the kind of spiritual authority that moves heaven and changes destinies. I pray that your journey with St. Anthony leads to recognition that exceeds your expectations and serves purposes greater than you can imagine. Remember, you're not just seeking success. You're seeking your role in God's plan for advancing His kingdom through your unique gifts and calling. If this message has inspired your faith and given you practical tools for breakthrough, please share this video with someone who needs divine recognition in their life. Your simple act of sharing could be the divine appointment that changes their destiny forever. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss new prayers and devotions that can transform your spiritual life. We're releasing powerful content every week that helps believers access the miraculous through time-tested Catholic traditions. Until we meet again in prayer, may St. Anthony's intercession bring you into the recognition that belongs to you, and may you use that recognition to serve God's purposes in the earth. Amen.